All right, we're joined now by a co-founder in 1968 of the American Indian Movement, Minneapolis, Minnesota there, and also an author, activist, a lecturer, Mr. Dennis Banks, in studio today. Dennis, thanks so much for being with us here at Muskogee Media. We love having you.
Oh, great being here. I want to just say one thing first. I am the principal founder of the American Indian Movement.
Right.
I'm the one that went knocking door to door for almost a month and a half, and finally people. We had several meetings before the actual first meeting took place. George Mitchell, Harold Goodsky, myself, and those were kind of the principal movers behind what was about to happen. We didn't realize how it was going to take off, but it did take off.
Now, these were the streets of Minneapolis there.
Yes.
And you were pulling the neighborhood and people together to fight police brutality.
That was the main reason. It was just bad. I mean, every weekend people would be rounded up and taken to the courts, but they'd be all beaten up when they come out. Mm-hmm. And then when we started mentioning that, this is about 6 months before the meeting, we started getting complaints, and we had a lot of information before the initial meeting of AIM, and to call, say police brutality was one of the worst brutality centers in the world, at least that's the way we felt. Mm-hmm. We had the information before us already, so we had documentation there. So. Mm.
And it's crazy because, you know, we see, that's 1968, we still see instances like just a few weeks ago in Winslow, Arizona, on the border town there of the Navajo Nation with the native woman. Actually, that's made national headlines too.
Terrible.
And still all this time later,
and the guy's record is now coming out where he was brutal mm-hmm. in 5 other jobs that he had as a police officer, and he's released each time, and again he's going to be released out of this one, but they should drag him to court. As a matter of fact, I've asked Larry Anderson, who is our point man in AIM on the res, if they would compile some information, maybe a couple of pages of what happened there, and we're going to go to the Justice Department and see if we can get a civil suit going against that guy.
We talk about, too, like, dealing with the same issues now all this time later. What's it been like for you to start up, you know, in 68 and 73, you know, we go move over to the Pine Ridge Reservation and things happen there. But what's it been like for you to see how it was then compared to how it is now and what AIM's doing now?
Well, ironically, the same issues about the police. It's still there. As a matter of fact, it's becoming much more subtle, and in some cases, a lot more outright brutality, mm-hmm. just like what we saw in Winslow. We were there. We were there that morning well, they're not in Winslow, but we were up at Zuni, mm-hmm. and we were talking about the brutality of the police, and then this thing was happening as we were. Wow. In conference there, and then it we'd moved on up to Shiprock, and then we said, what happened? What? We were right there near Winslow, and the picture across the country, you know, we've become a lot more stronger in terms of action-orientated people. And we see a lot of activity going on, a lot more activity than we did in 1966, 1967. Like, people were taking the beatings and not saying anything. And even this walk about domestic violence, it's been there for a long time, years, even years before I was born. And now we see, if we can get it to the surface and start the discussion about it, mm-hmm. start talking about it, then it'll start coming out.
Well, that topic there is one that our department has always focused on, mm-hmm. and worked very closely with our people in the Family Violence Prevention Program. Now we're looking at rooting out the problem within our own people. it's like the ancient ways of thinking that a man could do what he wanted to with his wife or his girlfriend or whatever is being challenged, and many of the young women, the older women in our communities are speaking up, saying they've had enough. They don't want to deal with this anymore. Now, what is the walk calling for in terms of change on the subject of domestic violence?
Well, first of all, I'd like to, well, you know what, when I used to go to the movies, even the silent movies, there was a lot of slapping going on with the women, men slapping women, James Cagney and a lot of other leading heroes of the time, slapping their wives, slapping their women. And so we were being almost programmed that like that was all right. And so, but what I would like to see happening, and is we're formulating it now, is to see when this first happens, and see if we can have a family court, and so that there would, so some counseling can come about right away between the perpetrator and the victim. See if before it goes to sentencing, and see if we can get them back together, and both of them go through counseling, and with the understanding to the perpetrator that if this doesn't work, then we will go ahead with the sentencing part of this, and then this means you're going to jail. I hate to see especially a family man or family break up, and then there's children involved. Then the father they can't see his children. Children can't see the father. And in rare cases, it is the female also has been a perpetrator. So I would like to see that happen first before once the person goes to prison, then inevitably it'll break up the family.
The longest walk started, as activism. You start looking at the 11 bills that were pending at the time, and then you move on to everything from diabetes awareness to sacred sites, which tied you close for our own very Muskogee Creek Nation, what we're dealing with from Ogiabova, our hickory ground.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what that's been for you each walk, but also, having that connection with us as Muskogee Creek Nation with what's going on in Alabama?
Yeah, of course the Peltier Walk drew a lot of attention. We did 2 walks already for Peltier. The president, the closest hope we had was Bill Clinton. And then things started to unravel for Bill Clinton. I mean, the FBI was on his case. And I think that there was some sort of a deal struck where, hey, look, don't bother me, and I won't release Peltier. I think that was the exchange there, because there was a lot of, we did a lot of concentration with Clinton administration. We met Janet Reno. I met with her, and she said we've been getting a lot of calls, a lot of telephone calls, a lot of emails and letters. Dennis, she said we're looking at it very seriously. So, and then things happened, and then Peltier was still in there. So after 40-some years now, he's still in there, and we hope Obama again will give another close shot at it.
Well, I'm glad you brought up President Obama. I was going to ask you about the possibilities of a release for Peltier, but also the job that he's been doing with tribal governments. He's drawing them closer to the White House than had ever been done before, at least publicly. So what do you think of the job that Obama's done as far as relations with Native American people?
I think they've been good. I think they've been great in some places, and I think exceptional in other areas as well. Of course, the Democrats feel that he's sold out. But once you become a president, you follow. You gotta if you want to go along, you gotta get along in there. And, you know, it's the same old, same old. I mean, I think the worst president of the United States has been Andrew Jackson. And I hear they're talking about taking him off the $20 bill. And I've always said, for many, many years, I've said, you know, this is the worst president the United States ever had with Native people. So, but I see, you know, he's been very close to Native people. He received an Indian name up there in Crow Country. He's visited many reservations and came to Pine Ridge. He's been to, I think he was up here in El Reno too, visiting a tribe up here before he went to the
Choctaws.
Yeah, before he went over to El Reno. I think that his scorecard is good, very, very good in terms of relationships with Native people. But I think there's still, like we hope, we're getting mixed signals. We're getting signals from the White House that he's asked questions about Peltier, and so when he starts asking questions about it, then we know that I mean, even when he was a senator, of course, he received information about Peltier then. I don't know. He's really our last hope to bring him home. I sat in the federal appeals court, 10th Circuit Court, in 8th Circuit rather, when the judge asked the prosecutor, the same prosecutor who said that Peltier aimed his rifle and shot Williams, and then Kohler, and then Williams, in cold blood, and the judge asked the same prosecutor 16 years later, what hard evidence that you have that Peltier killed the agents? And the prosecutor said, Your Honor, we don't know who killed the agents. And the judge became angry. He said, no, wait a minute. He's started looking around here, and he pulls up a file. He said, you said 16 years ago that Peltier shot Kohler in cold blood and then Williams. And now you tell us that you don't know who killed the agents? He said, there's something wrong with those statements. And anyway, and we thought for sure that Peltier would be released. But they said on a technicality that should have been raised at the time that he spoke those words. And since he didn't hear no objection, they thought that was it. But we felt that he should have been released. So, and there was the whole trial is filled with a lot of fabrication that the FBI did with Myrtle Poorbear. You know, she had 3 affidavits that they wanted her to sign. One of them was to get Peltier extradited back from Canada. They used three affidavits. The first one was what she submitted wasn't strong enough. Went back, and they said you got to tighten it up a little bit more. That one wasn't good, and the third one they finally had to accept it. She said she saw Peltier kill the agents. That's what gave Canada, you know, they extradited him then. Now
the issue of freedom for Peltier has kind of been one of the mainstays of the American Indian movement over the decades. It's always been in the forefront of the activities and things that you wanted to see happen for Native people. With this Longest Walk 5, we're seeing focus on drugs and domestic violence, as we've discussed. Mm-hmm. And I saw an article that talked about this walk and a phrase that said, the economics of survival is the cause for drug abuse. Now, is that something you agree with, or you would explain, or would you disagree with that statement?
I think it has a lot to do with the violence. When a man loses his job, and he's not the breadwinner anymore, and then they have to go on welfare. The woman goes to applies for welfare and gets it, and all of a sudden, you know, the role has changed. He's no longer the breadwinner, and so He goes out and things happen, he might start drinking, comes home, gets mad, and he's terribly upset because it seems like he's lost his authority as the breadwinner, and things begin to happen. And I know that there, on this walk, men have been talking to us, women have been talking to us about the violence. Generation after generation, they saw violence in their home. And the men now, we've had 4 men. One of them broke down crying, saying, yes, I've beaten my wife. I've beaten her 3, 4 times. He says, and only because, I feel ashamed. I'm not working anymore, and I just, my children don't. It seems like I've lost respect for my my children. To me, the economic picture in this country has caused some of that to happen. Not all of it, of course. Whereas the people with jobs still are involved with domestic violence. So it's a hard call on domestic violence, especially if there's been generation of violence. One woman, when I went to her home, she's had a sign. It says, a big sign in her home says, I stayed with my husband so that my children could have a father. And I left my husband so that my children could have a mother. And that didn't hold true for my granddaughter. And she died a very violent death. And not only violent, but the mutilation of her body, and the guy trying to destroy her whole body with propane, with gasoline, and with using the styrofoam plates, crushed them all up, put them on her body, and then torched her. That becomes like napalm when it's burning. Tried to destroy, almost did destroy her entire body, except that the way that they had put her in that grave, shallow grave, they had to double up her body, and so she had some intestines. They got the DNA from the intestines that still hadn't burned, but the rest of her body was just. I think he should, and now he's the district attorney. They've struck a deal with him. It was against our wishes. We wanted it to go to the grand jury, but I don't know why they didn't. I'm still gonna, when I'm going back on May 3rd for one of the hearings, I'm still gonna object to him making a deal. He doesn't deserve to make a deal. And I don't know why they're even making a deal with him to begin with. But the whole thing about domestic violence is a hard call. And
well, let me ask you this. Is the tactic of a walk across the country going to be effective in curbing that violence, in bringing it more to the forefront for our own people to deal with? In some cases, somebody might say, "Well, that's part of our dirty laundry," kind of thing.
I think it's Gary. I think it's gonna be the beginning of at least discussions coming to the table. I think there's going to be more of that. I talked to a judge in Minnesota just recently, as a matter of fact, in the last week, who called me about a man who's possibly going to prison. And he asked me, the judge asked me, he said, is there any program, Dennis, that we have available? He says, because I've talked to him and his wife, he says, and they want to try and keep the marriage together. So people are talking about it, and I think once we start talking about it, there's 2 thoughts, as I said. I want to try and get it into a counseling situation first, and then if not, then understanding if it happens again, then somebody's got to understand that if they keep doing this, then it becomes a crime, a very hard criminal act, which then something I really want take it out of the, out of the criminal justice system and put it into a domestic court, so to speak. I want to see, and I'm moving towards a position with drugs and all the drugs out there, to legalize the drugs, because prohibition in this country didn't work. You know, when people couldn't drink beer, they were manufacturing it in their home. Barrels and barrels were coming from Canada, and it didn't work. And only FDR finally said, "Hey, the gangsters are making more money than we are," so they decriminalized it, and they ended prohibition. And now, billions of gallons of beer are made, and it's controlled and it's taxed. If we can do the same thing with drugs, control it, monitor it, tax it, and let's have more clinics that can monitor and administer a little bit of drugs to those people who are shaking and screaming, and then take it out of the criminal justice system. We've got more people in prison in the United States than all of Western Europe has for all their criminals in their jails, even the ones murdering and robberies and rapes. And we have more people in our prisons than anybody else in the world. If we took all of our prisoners in the United States, place them in one area, we would have the 35th most populous state in the nation. That's how many people that we have in prison right now. I talked to a mother, and I looked at the court case. There's 2 guys doing prison terms, it's 2 years, for possessing paraphernalia of drugs. They had no drugs in their car. They didn't have drugs, but just for having paraphernalia. Oh my God! What is paraphernalia? If somebody has tools that aren't those burglary tools in some other context? If you're carrying condoms, is that is that paraphernalia for rape? But for possessing, my God, there's 2 18-year-old kids that are doing 2 years in jail for that. When they get out, criminal record's going to follow them all along. They're not going to be able to go to work right away because they're carrying paraphernalia. So decriminalize that and there are kids like that. There's men and women and children, even children, carry stuff around with them that could be construed as paraphernalia. So it's the criminal justice system has just been terribly wrong in how it's handling we're going to have to slow down. I mean, it won't be the 35th most populous state anymore. It might be number 1. Everybody, my God, it's terrible what the criminal justice system looks like in terms of handling crimes against people who carry stuff or possess it. In some cases, marijuana now is legal in some states. And some people in that same state of California are still doing time for smoking marijuana. Mm-hmm. It's absurd what's going on. Like when Russell Means and I were facing the justice system in South Dakota, for the Wounded Knee incidents, we were facing 250 years in prison plus a life sentence. And I was telling, when he was reading off all these indictments against us, I said, Russ, you do the 250 years. I'll do the life sentence.
Now you mentioned Russell Means there, who passed away not too long ago, and Vernon Belcourt passed away some years ago, seemingly leaving yourself and Clyde Belcourt as the most visible leaders of American Indian movement. Where are you now? What is there a way you can kind of describe the status of AIM since these changes? And I guess since all of us are getting a little older there, where's AIM now?
Well, in 2008, when we ended the longest walk 30 years after the first walk, I handed out 4 staffs to people and saying, it's time for you guys now, and women, 2 men and 2 women, and I said, it's time that you guys step up to the plate. I said, you got to let us older guys step back a little bit and move up to the plate. And so far, nobody's moved up. I've moved back a little bit, saying, see what's going to happen, even in my own family. And, you know, a lot of my kids are working. You know, I have one of my daughters is moving up the ladder in terms of, she's going back to get an MBA. So I'm proud of them. You know, I said, you guys got to get some schooling. Don't be like the dropouts in this country and never move up. So I'm looking at that and saying, oh my God, where is AIM going to go? It's going to fail. It's going to fall. It's going to break apart. Well, I've been continuing. This is my 8th walk I've been doing, by the way, on, you know, Peltier and the diabetes, and so. But there's like about 3 people on the walk. But now when I started saying, you know, talking, like I said, I'll be gone. I have to see my eye clinic doctor today and tomorrow. I said, can you guys handle it? I'm going into Tulsa. They said, yeah, we can handle it. They said, but we'd like to have you there when we're going into Tulsa. And so, my driver's Bond's going to drive me up there today.
But while you're on, you know, the walk consists of many different states. You're traveling a long way, and I imagine because you've done so many things throughout your life that each place kind of carries a memory, or, you know, when you see these places. Mm-hmm. And here for us specifically, you recently visited the roundhouse out on the Deer family's, you know, land. And I'm sure Philip Deer was somebody that you knew and were close to. And what was it like for you to see his roundhouse rebuilt out there and be with his family recently?
Well, I was at the old one, and
yeah.
But this one is I like it. I like the way it's got set up. They have this big pole, and the sun, at one certain date, the sun will come through and hit the pole. It'll hit the doorways, and it'll hit the fire, and hit the chiefs where they're sitting back there. Oh man, that he says that's how it's always been. Yeah. I've always wanted to pointing it to the east when the sun comes up. I love being out there. As a matter of fact, I've been staying out there now for the last 2 days because of my eye situation. But I've been on the walk as well. I think that keeping the traditions alive is probably the most critical, because when I look at the longest, I mean, this purpose of this walk on what you had asked earlier, I think that the biggest part of recovery will be using our own ceremonies, using the pipe ceremonies, the roundhouse, using the Sundance, the talking circles, every ceremony that we use now, we should bring it in, because we're also doing surveys. We've got about almost 1,500 surveys completed, and one of the questions is, what type of program would you advocate for recovery? And a lot of them are mentioning the same things that I've just said about the sweat lodge and about the Sundance and the pipe ceremonies, talking circle, and the roundhouse, because it was there that I saw a lot of traditional things that have happened there. Even when I was on the run and the FBI was looking for me, I came down here, went down to the ceremony. So for me, I see the traditions all across the country. Up north, the sweat lodge. I have built a sweat lodge in my own backyard, And I'm going to say that someplace before I get to D.C. that I would like to see a sweat lodge in every home, in the back of every home, and right next to it a garden, and so we could have our own food. But I think that our ceremonies are going to be pretty critical to recovery. I really believe that, and I'm going to advocate that. By the way, this is a three-year project.
Right.
This is the first year is the southern states. Next year will be Alcatraz, going through the middle states, and then the third year will be going through Montana and North Dakota. A lot of problems in Montana and North Dakota on meth and stuff like that. Matter of fact, when we were in two years ago, and when we were in Montana on the reverse diabetes, this lady, running crane family, she said, "Dennis, there's something more serious up here than diabetes." She says, "It's meth." She says, "I can sit in my porch now. I can tell you that house, and this house, and that house. They're making the meth. They're boiling the stuff."
You know, we talked with a gentleman on our radio program not too long ago about the drug epidemic facing our people, and he made the same point, that it used to be alcohol in all of its forms that people were killing themselves with, and now meth has made its inroads, and now we're seeing our young people come in with a mix of the problems, and it's just compounded by the presence of meth. So you got alcoholism still, but now you have meth and other drugs that are coming in. Now, can your walk, again, be effective in highlighting that problem and showing our own people the dangers of it, or a way to stand up and fight against it?
Absolutely. I think I can say right now that we are in the eye of a monster drug storm. A monster drug storm, and if we don't wake up to the fact that what it's doing to our young, we have now the highest suicide rate is with young people. We're talking about 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. There's 30,000 every year. There's 30,000 suicides, and 8,000 are combat veterans who get prescriptions from VA, and they all contain opiates and drugs. I mean, they become addicted to it. So they're part of that suicide group. But the highest within those 30 is the young people, Native Americans, and also high on the rape scenes. There's 293,000 rapes according to the FBI every year. Those are the only ones that reported. Native women, highest ones. The highest percentage of the women are Native women. So there's, I don't know where it came from. I know that it was not a tradition of our people. Matter of fact, I wear a that I got right here with the Muskogees, a hoodie that says "Warriors honor women," and that violence against our women is not a tradition, not our tradition. So I'm going to wear that. I'm going to promote every kind of any kind of program, and I'm finding in Arizona there's a big program. One of the best programs is in Arizona, Gila River. But I see the Muskogees too. They're advancing a lot of promotions against violence. And I seen a big billboard, as a matter of fact, on the interstate. The violence,
right.
Warriors honor women.
We like to think that it has been effective, because when we talk to the administrators of that program, they say there are more
people calling for
in.
advocacy.
Yeah.
Where before they maybe were afraid to call, ashamed to call, whatever. They just couldn't get them to call up, and the victims, and they're getting more and more women, sometimes men, maybe in some cases, that call up and have problems.
And now you intend on reaching the nation's capital in July, is that?
July 15th, yeah.
Okay.
What are you guys going to do when you get there? I mean, is there going to be like a reception like there's
Well,
been before?
we'll get there around 3rd or 4th in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to all these surveys. Now we're going to have them all there. We're going to be typing in all the information. The person who's leading this is a Potawatomi from Kansas, and she has got a master's on research and analysis, and she's going to be leading up the. Here's what percentage. Here's our picture. Here's where it's going. Here's what we can predict. Mm-hmm. So, to me, it's and we got 4 Penn State students that are helping us with the survey, doing them. They didn't come up with the questions. We did, Native people, and there was a domestic violence advocate who was Native. He's from Gila River. He said we modified our survey questions with him. He said, "Oh no, you can't. Don't be asking these. You want to ask the hard questions." And he modified the whole thing. He says, "I've been in this for 25 years." He says, "You don't want to ask them any soft questions." He says, "Maybe gently, but," he says, ask the tough ones.
You can have an iron fist, but put a velvet glove on it.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you'll be arriving in D.C. in the midst of the July the 4th Independence Day ceremonies, and it's crazy time to be in Washington.
Oh, yeah.
But it also marks the nearing the end of President Obama's term in office. There'll be months left before he is handing over the reins. Can you be effective, you think, in putting your point across to the president or his cabinet in those short months that you have remaining? And then, of course, after the election, we don't know what we're going to have. So, do you have enough time, do you think?
We've already been contacting the White House, and they believe they could at least have. There's a Native guy working over there. He's an Ojibwe man working there, or not Ojibwe. He's from. I'm thinking about the guy who works for Nike.
There is a Native liaison.
Yeah.
Diver is it? Karen Diver. She's on staff there. Yeah.
So yep, I think we're gonna make contact. They're gonna at least. By the way, the White House is already doing things. Michelle Obama has been doing things on domestic violence. So I think we have a pretty good chance of at least we're going to have a lot of information, stacks of the documentation, and I think we'll probably have to make almost like 1,500 packets to send back to all of the programs and the tribal leaders that that have helped us and give us information. So we're going to have a ton of stuff just on this walk, this southern walk, and so we'll see next year, the year after that. So I think we're gonna have a lot of valuable hard data on if I say that part of the recovery program will be based on our own values, just the Native American values.
Now, the walk has still got most of the country ahead of you. That's a long hike. I know my old bones wouldn't handle it very well, and maybe yours wouldn't either. What kind of help or support or assistance might you be looking for from Native people and other non-Natives who might wish to support you?
Well, I think mostly we're looking for gas money. That'd be the number one physical need and the other part would be forums, places where we could have the forums for the evening, and some such as media attention, such as we're getting here. I think in terms of the issue itself, the drug abuse and the domestic violence, we're not pointing fingers of who is buying and who is selling, because everybody knows who is buying and who is selling right now. Police don't move on them. So we're working for recovery, and I think that's the biggest place where we can be of service and help. If people, if one thing is needed is safe houses for women, safe houses. I'm even declaring my own home as a safe house, because it's a lot of people have programs on domestic violence, but if there's no beds in there available, then we're running up a problem with what even my granddaughter ran into. And she was screaming. She says, she was hollering at her mom. She says, "Mom, I told you nobody can help you. Nobody can help me." She says, "Maybe I'll just go back one more time." She didn't go back, but he went and grabbed her. And now she didn't have a even at the res, they didn't have an extra bed for her. And I went to the next level. I said, I got out of the car and I said, "Wait a while now, you come out and tell us this, but is there a program that you have that could put her up at a hotel for a week or 2 weeks?" She says, "No, we don't." She says, "We fund this, the tribe funds this place, we got 20 beds, but for the 21st person, there's no help." I think if we could find people could declare, if they want to help, they can declare their home as a safe house, and we will make that known. You know, where I've got a lot of places where I say, okay, this is a safe house, this is a safe house, but the person who needs a safe house doesn't need necessarily go to their hometown. We could find a safe house. If she lives in Minnesota, we could find a safe house for her in Iowa or in South Dakota or someplace where she can be secure. Because there's a lot of guys who out there are very selfish about this. They're saying, you know, if I can't have you, nobody's going to have you. And that's an old, and women say that as well. You know, if I can't have you, nobody's going to have you. So that's it's very selfish about human beings. You know, we own each other like property. So, but
fought a big war to end that. And I think both sides lost in that one, actually. That's just amazing. Well, that idea that you just put forth would put a human face on any kind of help, rather than just a cold mechanical program and a bed somewhere. They would be in with a family, a home.
Yep.
You know.
Well, Mr. Banks, thank you so much for your time visiting with us as you continue on this walk. We appreciate you coming in and talk about it. And
my pleasure.
Big witch.
Hey. All right. Hey.
Thank you.
Hey. Thank you very much.
You bet.